I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk. This is Hawk Talk 29. I'm with Nick Carter with Altus Group. We're talking about data center appraisal, data center taxes. You'll enjoy this. Check it out.
Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk.
Focused on cloud and colocation, data center industry trends, the dynamic market. Nick Carter, thanks for joining us. You're with Altus Group. You've been there for a while, but tell us about the company and your role there and what you're doing.
Absolutely, and we appreciate being included on this podcast.
Sure.
We're a kind of a two-tier organization. We have a group in our expert services department. We have Altus Expert Services, which is pretty much every property type of service that can be offered except for brokerage and property management. That's how I kind of tell peers our services are organized. The analytics tier of Altus Group is Altus Analytics, and that owns Argus Software, which is kind of the industry standard of multi-tenant underwriting. It's been the industry standard since I started in 2005. So what we do primarily in my group is appraisal. I have a small appraisal team that I work with, and we provide appraisals of all types of property from healthcare to more typical type of real estate types from office, multifamily, hotels. We do a lot of hotel work, a lot of hospital work, and we also look into anything that's special purpose, because that's typically where you have to dig in and find out a little bit more what's going on with these properties. So my experience, I've been working in appraisal since about 2005. I started in San Francisco, working with a few MAIs doing litigation type of appraisal work where we really have to dig in and defend all of the answers that we come up with, and then segued into a more traditional path to get MAI designation. But anyway, so that it's been about 10 years working in the Bay Area on every type of property that was in those 9 counties, including data centers, including large corporate campuses. But after gaining my expertise in San Francisco, I thought it prudent to start focusing on property types. So I went from going every property type in a certain geography to going probably a very few property types in the nation with Altus Group here. But my time at Colliers was a great time to learn appraisal work, and it developed this relationship with Altus that led me to find this tax group. And I was very impressed by the tax group, what the kind of work that they were doing, the kind of reach they had, the kind of specialty they had out of the South Lake office here was fantastic. So I made the move, and
Cool.
and that's essentially how it came about. And
Yeah.
And the data centers were kind of a natural progression. You know, I
Yep.
come from an engineering family, and I know real estate, so I figured I'd
Jump in.
I'd dive right in
Yeah.
and see if I could learn the property type.
That's great. And it's certainly been an interesting part of the data center space in the last 5 to 10 years as businesses have depended more on data center infrastructure to grow. Obviously, the property, the actual real estate assets that the servers and things like that are put into have increased in value. And so, but I'm interested from your perspective. Tell us just about your experience in data center appraisal, and what are some of the trends that are taking place in that world today?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I've been involved with data center appraisals actually earlier than I thought.
Okay.
Because I was looking back, one of the first assignments I had in 2005 was a rent arbitration for a tenant that had a significant amount of raised floor space in a high-rise office building.
Okay, sure.
And the tenant's position was, well, it's no different than general office space. We should be charged the same rent.
Sure.
The landlord's position was, look at this
Little bit different.
valuable build-out.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
so that was an interesting data center case. It's definitely a different type of data center than we're seeing in this market. Fast forwarding to today, the way we look at data centers is based on whatever the market looks at, and we have to do it that way. There's a certain quality level that's achieved in the data center world that is not necessarily realized in the market. The market won't pay for that, for what these users want to see. If it's for example, a tier 4 type of data center is not the ideal type of data center from an investment standpoint in the real estate. It's not typically we put it this way, we haven't seen that
Sure.
be dollar for dollar reimbursed in the marketplace
Yeah.
after construction.
Yeah, it's really changed. I mean, when I'd say when I got into the space back in '07, and it was more, I would say, traditional for end users themselves to own and operate their own data center. So, what we refer to as the co-location market, whether retail or wholesale, was less mature than it is today, and so you did have, I think, companies themselves believing that Tier 4 infrastructure made sense for them, whether they were a financial firm or a healthcare company, whatever it might be. And over time, I think the maturity of the co-location market kind of proved up that, Tier 3-ish, Tier 3 plus redundancy really makes more sense, and the extra dollars don't make sense from a capital investment standpoint, obviously, that impact the tax side of things. And one of the things that the shift from the enterprise user owning and operating their own data center to co-location has led to is sale leasebacks. And if you're in the traditional real estate industry, maybe from an office standpoint, you've heard that term. There's maybe some people that are from the IT or technology space that listen to our podcast that might not understand what that is. But tell us about the data center sale leaseback and why that trend is becoming more and more prevalent.
Well, it's funny because it's not necessarily just the data center space that the sale leaseback is so overwhelmingly used as a financing vehicle for these types. It's a way to recapture capital if you're an owner user and you've spent money on developing the property
Sure.
yourself. It's a very common way to do it. And if you have a strong balance sheet and are able to gain a favorable credit rating, if you want to go through that process, then
Yep.
you can get great returns on a rent. In other words, recognized through a lower cap rate.
Sure.
And you can raise a ton of money through leasing your property back and getting paid back for your cost to develop and pay off all your loans that
Yeah.
you spent to build it.
Yeah.
And that's really, I'd say, the primary the primary reason for sales leasebacks to be so popular is that the real estate markets overall have been so healthy and strong in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
And I think another reason that market has maybe increased in popularity from a data center perspective is, I think, as certain types of data center operators have looked to grow, it's essentially been easier to easy is not the right term to put with a sale leaseback, but it's been maybe more from a timing perspective quicker to evaluate a facility, be able to purchase that, have an anchor tenant in place, and then existing capacity available to lease to the market if they want to get in that market quickly. So almost from a timing perspective, we've seen some data center operators really look to that as an advantage. One of the things, obviously, Altus Group does work across the nation. I know you do work across the nation, but you've also focused on Dallas and a significant amount of work in Dallas.
well, all of Texas, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
In 2018, I know Dallas saw an increase in data center appraisals. Talk to us about why that happened and kind of your thought process behind that.
Well, it's funny in Dallas, you essentially have 4 counties that are responsible for taxing these things. Most of the data center construction activity has been in Collin County.
Okay.
The unique traits of the Dallas market that make it a challenge from an appraisal perspective is that it's a non-disclosure state. When these properties sell, the seller, the buyer, is not required to enroll their purchase price on the deed. It's not something that they have to tell the authorities about. So a lot of times, the assessors, and I don't envy their position, having to do mass appraisals and figure out what these things are worth. They have to look at the resources that they have available. A lot of times they'll raise the assessments to a level that might essentially force the buyer's hand to say, well, this is a massive assessment. We paid considerably less, so I'm going to show them what I paid for it.
Yeah, sure.
That's my best defense at that
Yes.
point. So that's a possibility. There's been some thought that that showing them the actual numbers for not just what you paid for it, but what you put into the property is the best way to address the assessment issue.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, in having the 4 different counties having completely different perspectives is another challenge, because if you have a Collin County property and then one that's identical in Dallas County, your assessment value is going to be different, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
Compare that to other markets in the country. Northern Virginia has they have a similar divergence in methodologies for their assessments between jurisdictions, but they're a disclosure state. So the ease in which they can find out what the actual investment numbers are to establish a market value is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say Dallas is very unique in that regard, and especially being, I think it's the 2nd largest data center market in the world right now, or sorry, in the nation right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Has gotten a lot of folks on the assessment side taking notice.
Yeah. Talk to us about the customer or the clients that you normally help, and then what are some of the best practices you've seen them do well to succeed?
Our main customers are essentially the developers,
Yeah,
or the owners, or the tenants.
Yeah.
That's probably the 3 groups that we represent the most. I'd say about 5 years ago, when property taxes were maybe $2 to $3 a square foot, they were more of a back office admin function of the CFO's office. They were handled, they were required, it was a necessary evil, and they were addressed. But now we've seen the assessments get so high that I haven't seen $30 a square foot for property taxes yet, but I've seen 29. It's got that. Now that's an outlier. They're about 10 to 15. We've seen that for property taxes, which is a very high property tax expense compared to other markets. So this becomes no longer a back of the office type of a function. This becomes a strategic function in order to ensure that the property can compete reasonably with its peers. If you have 2 data centers that are identical to one another in the same markets with the same infrastructures, but you have property taxes at $15 a square foot on one and $5 a square foot on the other, sure, it's being passed on to your tenant, but that's going to come out of your net rent.
Sure.
The total cost of occupancy is going to be a factor to these tenants, and the total cost of occupancy is going to be a function of the property taxes. So it's the short answer to this is our clients have pretty much agreed across the board that it needs to be a proactive rather than a reactive approach.
Certainly.
With my home, I'm reactive. I see if they've raised it. If they have, I go in there and I holler and shake my hands and trying to see what I can do to get my taxes more in line.
Yeah.
But with these data center clients, they have to get in front of this. They have to render their personal property in a timely manner and in a way to get that in conformance with a real property tax. So they have a real property tax assessment and a personal property tax assessment. And it's much more of a strategic type of decision on how to handle your property taxes than it was when they were more typically in line with other types of property.
Yeah. What when you're completing a data center appraisal, going through that process, what are some of the challenges from your perspective? I mean, when you're having to walk through that process, what are some of the things that you're paying attention to help your client in the best way? Yeah.
So the trickiest part, I think, of any appraisal, and it's the part that gets missed the most, is answering the right question. Mm-hmm. In a property tax appraisal, you have to adhere to the definition of market value that is in play for that jurisdiction. It's often very similar to the one that's used in banking by the feds. It's a most probable value given a certain exposure time, given equally motivated parties. That's the summary of it. But what's critically important in a real estate appraisal is to be able to complete an appraisal of the correct rights. So what are the rights? Is it real property or personal property? Mm-hmm. Is it a leased fee? Does it have a long-term lease in place? Or is it a fee simple, meaning that the property is unencumbered, able to be occupied, able to be loaned against, all sorts of things. So getting that first question right is very often missed, and it's and it leads to a product that might not necessarily be useful
Sure.
to the client. So once you've answered that question, you can go through it from just a basic perspective on data centers. I would say that I look at the real estate as being rated by 3 criteria. The first one is, can it deliver satisfactory uptime? Security. Can it, where would it fall? Typically there's a tier rating system.
Sure.
And there's different ways to measure that. The second is end user performance. So is a data center going to be able to perform the way it should? This is where you get into the edge concept, and where the different locations, site selection can be population versus the source of the data. And then the third one is efficiency. Is it able to compete? Property taxes is part of it. Is it able to compete on an operating expense basis? Utility costs is part of that. So if you can win 2 of them, you can maybe slip on the other, but that's how we rate them essentially, from a real estate perspective.
Yeah. How would you compare being in the data center market now for a while, how would you compare the data center asset class to, larger commercial real estate asset classes like office or industrial or retail? Like how does it compare to those?
Cisco came up with a definition for a data center that had no reference to real estate whatsoever. It was a network of it was in the context of a network of computers. Microsoft just recently sunk a tube into the Pacific.
Sure.
Filled it with a data center, and it worked. I don't think it worked well, but I think the goal is to make it work in the first place.
Yeah.
Compass has come up with an edge type solution, which is able to move the system effectively to different locations in a way that the user can still use it but benefit from adjacency to a population base. So I would say that the real estate component of a data center is the most interesting. What is real estate? Does it need to be real estate in the first place?
Yeah.
Does it need to be occupied by people? Office, you have an occupancy density based on human beings, retail human beings, multifamily human beings. So it's really a piece of equipment more than it is a conventional type of real estate.
Yeah.
And that's how we treat it, and I think that's how the market treats it.
Yeah. And how much, where that piece of equipment is located, one more time, just break down kind of some of the tax implications of that, and where, if the difference between if I put a data center in Dallas versus Chicago, Collin County versus Dallas County, what are some of the differences between, like, market to market, county to county from a tax standpoint?
Well,
and not specifically those, but just like what is someone thinking about when they're locating their data centers within those markets or within those counties?
Well, incentives and credits are a huge part of
Okay.
it. There are markets, and one of the reasons that Loudoun County has been so successful, amongst others, is that they have a very effective economic development department. Buddy Reiser's in charge of that, and I've heard him speak a few times. And they're able to combine efforts with the taxing authorities, create an incentives program, and help give a bit of a tailwind to the folks that want to actually put their properties in that market. Now, there are some markets in Dallas now that have a tax environment that has made investors maybe take a second look at that market. They say, well, we want to underwrite our expenses 5 to 10 years into the future, but if we're not sure what our property taxes are going to be, the predictability of underwriting an investment is very important.
Sure.
I would argue almost if you had $3 this year, but it was unpredictable for the next 5 years, or $5 this year that was predictable, I would argue that the investment community would be much more likely to select the predictable cash flow into the future.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. But Texas will always be one of the most affordable places to put a data center because we're sitting on very affordable power.
Yeah, you bet.
Half of it, I think, approximately half of it is natural gas sourced, which is right underneath us. so we can get to 4 cents a kilowatt hour levels that are not seen in the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And also, Texas is, it's at the convergence of rail lines from coast to coast, which is where you get a fiber highway.
Yeah.
So you have that, and then you have access to Latin America
Yeah.
via this convergence of systems here. So Texas, especially North Texas, it's away from the hurricanes.
Yeah.
It's removed from Houston.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of physical and economical benefits to being here.
Yeah.
So.
And, you bring up the power costs. I think and specifically for North Texas, I think when I got into the industry like 08, 09, the power cost here was like 7-ish cents a kilowatt, like around that range.
Yeah.
I know in like 05, 06, it was higher. And so it's been amazing to see it drop that low. I mean, it's so, from a cost perspective, as your electricity load gets larger, the cost that can, the cost impact that savings can have, is pretty significant.
Oh, yeah.
And, certainly not saying that every data center transaction or opportunity has to come to Dallas, but there's some significant savings from a power perspective when compared to other markets. So,
and that's, these, what's the latest? I did the math on this, and I hope I'm right. It's 400 megawatt facility, which we don't see in this country. Like they're in China maybe, but that's a large data center. I say can consume the same power as the city of Fort Worth, Texas.
sure.
Yeah. And that's an interesting perspective when you're looking at the resources that go into these facilities.
Yep.
And a little movement on the needle for utility costs is going to be
Makes a big
tremendously
difference.
impactful.
Yeah. What are any other trends from your perspective that you're seeing from a data center industry standpoint? What else would you say is kind of like on your mind from a trend standpoint in the market today?
Trends in the market, I'd say there's two things we can look at: economic trends, and we can look at design trends.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke earlier about the Tier 4. Tier 4 is useful and has a place. It does. It has, I think it's separate power grids, all of the things that can guarantee that almost perfect uptime performance that's required,
Mm-hmm.
and that almost perfect security that's required for certain applications. Maybe it's banking to government to that type of a use. But from our perspective, we try and focus on sales and what happens.
Sure.
What's the market saying? What are they doing? What are they building?
Yep.
What they're building right now is right at a Tier 3 standard, but a lot of them are foregoing the actual certification. So they will build something that's up to a Tier 3 standard that can be fully redundant, but doesn't necessarily require a certification in order to be marketable. In other words, they can get the tenant base, they can get the investor interest without getting that actual merit badge.
Yeah.
It's funny. I look at the tier rating just like a credit rating. If you're going to go offer a long-term debt offering to the market, you can pay Standard & Poor's or Moody's to stamp you a investment grade credit offering. Your long-term debt offering is typically what's rated. And you pay for that, and then you realize a premium and the money you're able to raise.
Mm-hmm.
So with a Tier 3 type of rating, the main market motivation by the users we've spoken to, what they're looking for when they're selecting different facilities is the concurrently maintainable type of facility where they're able to do maintenance on one part and keep the rest of it up. So if they're able to do that and be just sub Tier 3,
Mm-hmm.
that's overwhelmingly represented in the market. There are a lot of facilities that are having that be their ideal type of design standard.
Yeah.
Because the cost differential to get from a Tier 3 and up is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the jump between a Tier 1 and Tier 2 is not the same as a Tier 3 to a Tier 4.
Sure.
To get to that level is a huge investment.
Yeah.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. Well, so I just want to close with this. So, I always tell people it's hard to, if you're in the data center industry, you got to jump all the way in the deep end because it is such a, you've got to know a lot about a lot of different things depending on which avenue you're helping clients. You all are focused on the tax side, the appraisal side. There's some that are focused on the development side. Some are focused on the consulting side, whatever it might be. But if you think about this from a 1, 3, 5, 10-year perspective, why do you get excited about being in this market and fully focusing on the data center space?
That's a fun question, because I remember when I started looking at it, it was 2017, and there was a Forbes article that said that 90% of the data in existence as of 2017 was generated 2 years prior.
Sure, you bet.
So
probably by the Liggett home. It's
Yeah.
like my kids playing video games.
Yeah, anything video-wise. In 2017, I'm trying to think to myself, well, what were autonomous cars doing in 2017? They were there, but they weren't as common, maybe. Was streaming as common? Probably about, but not in nearly as many households.
Sure.
So now we're in 2019. That was a 2017 article. If my math is correct, do we have, now is it 2/3 of the data in existence ever was generated in the last 2 years? It's something exponential like that. So there needs to be a home for these ones and zeros that are being generated and used by. I think you can plug your cigarette into your computer now, and that'll generate data.
Some data,
Yeah. Autonomous cars, once they start self-driving, they're going to be taking data from every part of the vehicle, up and down, all around, and processing it. And that's a matter of critical public safety. So these facilities are going to be needed. They're going to grow, I think pretty quickly.
Yep.
But, I love Gordon Moore's law, the co-founder of Intel, who said that computing power was going to increase at a certain rate while decreasing at another rate by an exponential factor. The famous Moore's law. I don't know if that's still the case, but we're in that type of a situation on the growth of data, and it's going to need a house. It's going to need a place to be processed. Densities are going to change possibly. Rack densities will vary. Everything's going to vary, but there's going to need to be real property or some type of locational based solution. That I don't see going away.
Well, we certainly don't either, and appreciate you stopping by. Appreciate your insight on the market. And
we couldn't do what we do without good market information, and you guys do that, and we couldn't do a data center appraisal without you guys, and we appreciate what you guys have put together. It's the backbone of all the work we do in property tax and appraisals, having good access to data, know what's going on in the market, and you guys know it.
You bet. Well, Nick, we appreciate it. Look forward to the next time we can connect.
Happy to do so. Thank you.